during tumultuous times. And whether it's the state and health of our democracy, whether it's race relations, whether it's our affairs abroad, or whether it's just a performance of our economy, we're fragile. And we need to move to a period of greater trust in our institutions of governance, in our leaders, and in our capacity to get things done as a country, even across political boundaries.
You have said, in fact, that the biggest test that Donald Trump will face in 2017 is an acute lack of trust in the country's leaders. Has his own performance to date helped or hindered him in that challenge?
It's too soon to tell, because I do believe that trust will be restored ultimately when people feel their democracy is actually working on their behalf. And that means you got to get a few things done. And the fact of the matter is, nobody's going to be able to get anything done unless you cross that impenetrable political divide, because no one party has all the recipes for success or all of the truth.
You are a Republican, but as an Obama appointee as U.S. ambassador to China, you sit in a sort of interesting position, I think, when it comes to politics in the US. You put your country first, correct. So what a diplomat you are. Let me talk to you about China, because we've had some pretty heated rhetoric from Donald Trump. How is Beijing dealing with that?
I used to work for President Reagan. He said in the election of 1980 that we would cut our diplomatic links with Beijing, which had just been restored the year before under Jimmy Carter, and recognize Taipei as a legitimate China. Those were fighting words, if ever there were fighting words spoken. He then went to China a couple years later. I went with him when I was a young staffer on the White House staff. So we go from rhetoric that oftentimes divides and puts the Chinese in a very difficult place, to winning the election and then having to govern and dealing with the world as it is. So at some point, just like every president since Ronald Reagan, in every election we've had the same kind of heated rhetoric. The butchers of Beijing said Bill Clinton. Bush got into problems over Tiananmen Square. And so this is kind of a replay of what we've seen before. Trump at some point is going to have to say, I've got to sit down and do business with the Chinese. I'm going to have to cut deals. I'm going to have to work on security matters, environmental matters, even securing greater stability in the Middle East. I can't get it done without including China at some point.
So you're not troubled by his comments about China to date?
I'm not terribly troubled. I've been around long enough, Becky. I've heard this stuff before. Although, as it relates to the one China policy, this is a policy that both Taiwan and China buy into. So when you say that you're going to make the one China policy a bargaining chip, that probably won't fly in the end.
I want to talk North Korea with you just for one moment. In his New Year's message, the North Korean leader said his country is close to test launching an intercontinental ballistic missile. What is your advice to Donald Trump on how to handle the North?
Recognize North Korea for what it is. It's a dangerous, unpredictable, almost suicidal state. What we do know is that they've paraded an intercontinental missile, ballistic missile, in their military parades, but they've never used one. The chances are pretty good that they either have one or are very close to having the technology to launch one. So today, they could launch a nuke into South Korea. They could probably hit Japan with a short or medium range missile. Pretty soon, they're going to be in a position to hit Guam, then Hawaii, and then other parts of U.S. territories. Then we're in real trouble. So I would guess that 2017 or 2018 will be the year of North Korea. The United States will have to do something about the increasing threat posed by North Korea.
And this is where many people will say perhaps the bilateral relations with China will come in once again. Is China's control, though, over the North waning, do you think?
It is, in fact, waning. The North has...
U.S., and now the U.S. and Europe are so weak they can't do that. So a stronger yuan coupled with health and pension reform would give birth to a Chinese consumer and therefore basically make that country strong, prosperous, and less in conflict with us. My own view is that China respects strength and exploits weakness. And what we've been showing China for a long time now is either benign neglect in the Bush administration or flat-out weakness in the Clinton administration. One of the first things that Hillary Clinton did, and I've been a fan of hers, but one of the first things she did in 2008 when she became Secretary of State is basically announce in a speech that she would not hassle the Chinese government about human rights, that it was all about trade relationships and national security things vis-a-vis North Korea and things like that. The Chinese will exploit that kind of weakness. I believe that if Barack Obama had kept his promise that he made in 2008 to the people of Michigan and Pennsylvania to brand China a currency manipulator, that if he'd kept that promise, that we'd have a stronger yuan and a more balanced trade with China. I think that we just simply have to stand up for our own interest, not tolerate cheating, and I think that the Chinese government will respond positively to that. See, look, I think that in one scenario, the relationship between China and the U.S. could be wonderful, okay? You'll see in the film, there's this great rhetoric by Bill Clinton talking about how we were going to let China into WTO and get access to the biggest market in the world, and American companies are going to produce on American soil, sell into that market, okay? If the Chinese government can make the move now, basically, and empower their consumers and move from a third of their economy consumption to two-thirds like Germany, Europe, and we are, okay? They would buy our stuff. We would make at least some of it here. Their standard of living would go up, and life would be good. That's what free and fair trade is supposed to be like. But we don't have that now. And until we have that, the relationship is going to be very, very, very conflicting as it is now. And you can just see what's going on with Japan and China and us being drawn into that to know that there's nothing alarmist about a prediction that there could be a hot war. Yeah, things are cheap at Walmart, as Gordon Chang says, but you have to consider the consequences. So here's one scenario. You have income basically zero for the last 10 years. You have 25 million people now out of work, and when they go to a Walmart, they can barely pay for anything, and it's nice to have the prices as low as possible. Scenario 2, 25 million people have a job, and they have rising income, and they pay a little bit more for their stuff at Walmart. I like that world a lot better. Well, there's two things. There's an interesting thing going on the campaign trail. Romney comes out and wants to brand China a currency manipulator on his first day in office. Now, the advantage of that is that it's a global solution. In other words, if you impose duties there, it would basically be duties and tariffs across the board and would help all industries in America offset that. On the other hand, Obama, when I was down in Ohio, in fact, in Columbus, the day I was there, he announced some additional cases before the WTO for auto parts. Okay, so far in his administration, he's done like 8 cases. That helps very specific industries, but it leaves all the other industries apart. So the WTO is a very, very ineffective mechanism to basically bring somebody to the table on the question of unfair trade practices, because you have to go piece by piece, industry by industry, and it takes too long. Well, who's the U.S.? I mean, if you look, there's a great scene in the film, this guy, Ralph Gomery, who is Professor Emeritus at, I think, MIT, and very distinguished man. And he says, he's talking about Apple, and it's like the shareholders get the profits, but China gets the wages, right? And what America needs is wages, right? So that's, that's the conundrum. So we're in danger in this country. I mean, this whole thing with Romney and the 47% thing, right? It's scary, if you think about it, to have 47% of the people in this country not paying any taxes. I was in Calgary about 4 days ago giving a speech up there, and they were talking all about it, because in Canada, it's only 36%. It's only 36%. And so our percentage is rising and rising and rising because we've lost this manufacturing base and we've had zero wage growth. So there it is. We gave away the most powerful tool we had to put pressure on the Chinese government on human rights when we let them into the World Trade Organization. Okay? And the history goes like this. Before China had most favored nation status, which was the precondition for entering the WTO, there was an annual rite of passage in Congress, basically, as to whether or not we were going to renew trade with China under the existing rules. Okay? At that point, there was some trade, but it wasn't a flood. Okay? So we did it. We did it every year, and every year we were able to use that debate to extract concessions from the Chinese government on human rights. Now, 1994 was the year that Bill Clinton, as president, loosened up on that. And you'll see in the film a guy named Chris Smith, conservative Republican who focuses a lot on human rights, just disgusted with that because it was a pure sellout to the multinationals that you'll see also in the film. But when we got to 2001, the vote that was held in Congress wasn't to let them into the WTO. It was to give them permanent MFN, permanent most favored nation status. And that was the best bargaining tool we had up until that point to have them abide by more humane human rights abuses. And you will see in the film. Do we have any Falun Gong in this room? Does anybody know what that is, Falun Gong practitioners? Okay. You will see in the film that for the practice of Falun Gong Buddhism,